All right, we're diving deep into the 1st century CE today to look at a conflict that was so much more than just a rebellion. This was a brutal, world-shattering war, the Great Jewish Revolt against the Roman Empire. It was this desperate, all-or-nothing struggle that ended in an absolute catastrophe, and it reshaped the futures of Judaism, Christianity, and the Roman Empire itself. It's an incredible story of oppression, faith, unbelievable victories, and ultimately, fatal divisions.
You know, so much of what we know about this war really comes down to one man, Flavius Josephus. And he wasn't some historian writing from a safe distance years later. No, he was a Jewish commander who fought the Romans, got captured, and then had to witness the complete destruction of his own people. His accounts, yeah, they can be a bit biased at times, but they give us this incredibly personal, tragic window into the chaos. He saw it all, and lucky for us, he wrote it all down.
So how does something like this even happen? How does an entire province go from, relative peace to all-out war with the world's greatest superpower? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. For decades, the Roman province of Judea was basically a pressure cooker. All these tensions were just simmering right below the surface, waiting for one tiny spark to cause a massive explosion.
And the thing is, it wasn't just one thing. There were layers to the discontent. I mean, imagine decades of Roman rule that's just getting more and more oppressive. You've got these corrupt officials treating the province like it's their own personal piggy bank. The taxes were just crushing, all to fund Emperor Nero's crazy projects back in Rome. And on top of that, the society itself was fracturing between a wealthy elite who were cozy with Rome and the masses who were dirt poor. Add in the constant friction with their Greek-speaking neighbors, and you have a recipe for absolute disaster.
Every pressure cooker has a tipping point, a moment it finally blows. And in Judea, that tipping point was a man named Gessius Florus. Historians basically describe him as exceptionally cruel and totally incompetent. His actions weren't just bad management, they were deliberate provocations. He was basically pouring gasoline on an already smoldering fire. He was the final straw.
And here's how fast it all fell apart. First, in the city of Caesarea, some local Greeks sacrificed birds right at a synagogue entrance, a huge insult. When Jewish leaders go to Florus to complain, he has them arrested. Then, he marches into Jerusalem and seizes 17 talents of silver straight from the sacred temple treasury. When the people protest, Florus unleashes his soldiers, who massacre thousands of residents. And that was it. That was the breaking point. Rebels rose up, completely overwhelmed the Roman garrison in the city, and just like that, the war had begun.
So what started as riots and protests quickly turned into a full-blown war for independence. And in the very beginning, the rebels pulled off something that nobody, and I mean nobody, especially not Rome, thought was possible. They won.
This, right here, was the formal declaration of war. A priest named Eleazar ben Hananiah persuaded the temple authorities to stop the twice-daily sacrifices that were offered for the health of the Roman emperor. In a world of symbols, this was the ultimate slap in the face. It was like tearing down the flag at an embassy. It sent a clear message to Rome: your authority here is done. Rome, of course, was not going to take this lying down. The governor of Syria, a guy named Cestius Gallus, put together a massive force, including the entire 12th Legion, to just stamp out this revolt. He marched on Jerusalem, probably expecting a quick and easy victory. But the Jewish rebels, even though they were outmatched in a straight-up fight, were brilliant at guerrilla warfare. They used the terrain, launching these hit-and-run attacks that just wore down the Roman troops. Gallus got to the outskirts of Jerusalem, but for reasons historians still argue about, he hesitated, and then decided to retreat. This was a fatal mistake. As the Roman legions were pulling back through the narrow pass of Beth Horon, the rebels sprang their trap. It was a complete slaughter. Arrows, stones, everything just rained down on them from the hills. The organized Roman formations just broke into chaos. Nearly 6,000 Roman soldiers were killed. And in the ultimate humiliation for Rome, the rebels captured the legion's sacred eagle standard, the Aquila. This was an unthinkable disaster for the Roman army.
Can you imagine the news of this victory? It spread like wildfire. To the rebels, it must have seemed like a miracle, like a sign that God was actually on their side. The momentum was just unstoppable. A provisional government was set up in Jerusalem to run this new independent state. They started organizing, dividing the country into military districts, and thousands of new volunteers flocked to the cause, totally convinced they could actually win their freedom. But that victory at Beth Horon, well, it had awakened a sleeping giant. Back in Rome, Emperor Nero was beyond furious. The defeat of an entire Roman legion could not go unpunished.
That first response had been like a regional police action. What was coming next was going to be total war, led by Rome's most seasoned and ruthless professionals.
Nero chose his absolute best man for the job, Vespasian. This was a veteran general, a guy known for his brutal efficiency in the wars over in Britain. He wasn't some politician. He was a soldier's soldier, through and through. And he brought his son, Titus, who had proved to be every bit as relentless. Their mission was simple. Don't just suppress the revolt. Annihilate it. Make an example out of Judea that no one will ever forget.
And I mean, just look at the mismatch here. The disparity in forces was just immense. Vespasian showed up with over 60,000 professional troops, a massive, disciplined Roman army. On the other side, the Jewish rebels, despite their early success, were really just a collection of passionate but disorganized militias. They had all the courage in the world, but they were about to face the full, crushing weight of the Roman war machine.
Vespasian didn't just make a mad dash for Jerusalem, he was methodical, cold. He started up in the north, in Galilee, and just began to systematically sweep the country. His policy was simple. Any city that surrendered was occupied. Any city that fought back was besieged, stormed, and utterly destroyed. Its people were either killed or sold into slavery. This is actually where Josephus, who was the rebel commander of Galilee at the time, had his fateful showdown with the Romans, which led to his capture.
So, as the Roman legions are advancing, just destroying everything in their path, you'd think the rebels back in Jerusalem would be uniting, right? Getting ready for the final stand? Well, the exact opposite happened. The greatest threat to Jerusalem wasn't just the Romans outside the walls, it was the catastrophic civil war that was raging inside.
You see, the rebellion was never one monolithic group. On one side, you had these radical factions like the Zealots and the Sicarii, who were named for the little daggers, the Psyche, they used to assassinate their opponents. They believed in total war, no surrender, convinced that God himself would intervene and save them. And on the other side, you had the moderates, who looked at the overwhelming Roman force and thought the only way to save the city and the temple was to negotiate some kind of surrender.
It's just tragic. As the Roman army is closing in, the defenders of Jerusalem turn on each other. The Zealots launched a coup, they seized control of the city, and they started executing any moderate leaders they could find. The city became a battlefield, not against Rome, but between Jews. They slaughtered their own best fighters before the Romans even breached the first wall.
And then came this, perhaps the single most self-destructive, mind-boggling act of the entire war. To make sure nobody could even think about holding out for a long siege, to force everyone into a final fight-to-the-death battle, the Zealots set fire to the city's enormous grain stores. They deliberately destroyed the food that could have kept the population alive for years. They doomed their own people to starvation.
By the year 70 CE, a brief Roman civil war that had paused the campaign was over. Vespasian was now the emperor back in Rome, and he sent his son Titus to finish the job. So Titus arrives at the gates of Jerusalem to find a city packed with war refugees, but a city that had already condemned itself to famine. The final horrifying chapter was about to begin.
The siege lasted 7 agonizing months. Titus built a wall completely around the city, sealing it off. Nobody could get out. The famine that followed was just indescribable. Josephus writes about people eating the leather from their own shields, about robbers searching the dying for just a crumb of food. And all while the city starved, Roman siege engines relentlessly pounded the walls. They broke through the first wall, then the second. The fighting in the streets was brutal, house to house, until the last defenders were finally pushed back to their final sanctuary, the Temple Mount. And then on the 9th day of the month of Av, a Roman soldier threw a torch, and the Holy Temple just went up in flames. Josephus puts the death toll at a staggering 1.1 million people, mostly from starvation and disease. Now, that's probably an exaggeration, but the number itself tells you the scale of the catastrophe. Tens of thousands more were sold into slavery. And in a final, cruel twist of irony, many of them were forced to build the Colosseum in Rome, a monument to Roman victory, paid for with the treasure they plundered from their own destroyed temple. Now, the war didn't officially end for a few more years, until the last holdouts at the fortress of Masada were defeated in 74 CE. But the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, that was the real turning point. From the ashes of this revolt, a completely new world emerged, with consequences that would echo for the next 2,000 years.
This, right here, really captures the single most profound legacy of the war. Before the revolt, Judaism was a religion centered on a physical place, the Jerusalem temple, and it was led by high priests who performed animal sacrifices. With the temple gone, that form of Judaism was literally impossible. So out of this crisis, rabbinic Judaism was born. The religion had to transform itself, focusing not on a location, but on sacred texts, with rabbis as teachers and local synagogues as community centers. This was the revolutionary change that allowed Judaism to survive and even thrive while scattered across the world.
The ripple effects were just felt everywhere. This revolt marked the end of any real Jewish political independence for nearly 2,000 years. It scattered the Jewish people even further across the globe, growing the diaspora. For Rome, the victory cemented the power of the new Flavian dynasty, Vespasian and Titus. It also dramatically sped up the split between Judaism and the new Christian movement, which now had to figure out its identity without the temple. And of course, it gave us that enduring, tragic story of Masada, where the last rebels chose mass suicide over capture by the Romans.
So what are we left with? Well, the Great Jewish Revolt was an absolute, undeniable disaster in the short term. But its long-term legacy is this incredible story of destruction leading to resilience and total transformation. It's just a powerful reminder of how a single, violent conflict can completely alter the path of a people, a religion, and the very fabric of world history.